Let me start with a story that every philosopher and every policymaker should tattoo in their mind. In colonial India, the British government, while ruling over Delhi, worried about the growing number of venomous cobras slithering through the streets. In an act of well-meaning efficiency, they offered a reward for every dead cobra. It sounded brilliant, clean-cut, moral, and compassionate. Save lives, reduce danger, reward civic cooperation. But within months, something unexpected happened. People began breeding cobras solely to kill them for money. When the government finally discovered the manipulation, it canceled the bounty. The breeders, now stuck with worthless reptiles, set them free, and the cobra population skyrocketed far beyond what it was before. That event became immortalized as the Cobra Effect, a parable of how our attempts to fix problems often amplify them. And what Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Jung, and even modern behavioral economists remind us is this: every good intention contains the seed of unintended consequence. The road to ruin is not paved by evil, it's paved by misplaced virtue. So I want to ask you something. How often does your urge to do good actually serve your need to feel good? Good intentions are seductive because they flatter the ego. They make you feel benevolent without demanding full awareness. Philosopher Emmanuel Kant warned that morality isn't measured by wanting to do good but by understanding why we do it. The dangerous illusion of virtue is that it assumes clarity where there is none. When we act from compassion without comprehension, we risk what I call emotional hubris, the arrogance of assuming that kindness is automatically wisdom. You buy someone temporary comfort and accidentally cripple their long-term growth. You impose help that insults hidden dignity. You feel morally superior but have no idea what your help costs the unseen fabric of consequences. In other words, the Cobra Effect isn't just economic, it's psychological, spiritual, and relational. Every time you act impulsively from righteousness without reflection, you breed new cobras in the unseen world of outcomes. From politics to parenting, from charity to leadership, the pattern repeats. The moment we confuse emotional satisfaction with ethical clarity, we turn solutions into new forms of suffering. Tell me honestly, how many of your proudest resolutions turned later into burdens you couldn't undo?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
The trap deepens when good intentions are collectivized. Entire societies can form moral crusades that begin in idealism and end in destruction. History is filled with revolutions fought for liberty that spiral into tyranny, censorship campaigns disguised as virtue, and policies that pamper short-term emotion at the cost of long-term reason. The Cobra Effect on a civilizational scale is far more insidious because it masquerades as progress. Carl Jung would say this is the shadow of morality, the darker half of goodness that emerges when we try to force virtue through power. When we weaponize empathy, we get manipulation. When we glorify safety above understanding, we breed dependence. When we chase perfection, we exile truth. The wise must therefore practice what I call humble ethics, the art of slowing down moral enthusiasm with philosophical depth. Before you save the world, learn to see the whole picture: complexity, contradiction, cost. True wisdom never rushes to rescue, it contemplates the cascading ripples first. It asks, what could this ruin if it succeeds? Think about that. The most dangerous ideas in history weren't malicious, they were incomplete. Now, let's take this truth personally. Every one of us has unleashed a Cobra Effect somewhere in our life. You try to protect someone and instead enable their weakness. You give advice and accidentally plant anxiety. You chase happiness and catch addiction. You silence conflict to maintain peace, and in doing so, ferment resentment. Why? Because the mind's default morality is linear. It thinks if a cause is pain, then opposite of a must cause healing. But reality isn't linear, it's systemic. Every decision interacts with a network of other decisions, beliefs, and incentives that mutate your intention as soon as it leaves your control. This is why the wisest philosophers, Buddha, Lao Tzu, Marcus Aurelius, all emphasize detachment from attachment to results. They didn't mean indifference to outcome, they meant acknowledging that outcomes have lives of their own. It's terrifyingly simple. The world doesn't owe you alignment between your motive and its effect. So the truly moral person isn't the one who acts most passionately, but the one who acts most consciously. And you, do you measure your morality by motive or by awareness? If we step back and be brutally honest, the Cobra Effect teaches us that life itself is one vast feedback loop of unintended consequences. The more idealistic we are, the more likely we are to ignore them. And that's tragic because ideals are necessary. They inspire progress, but unchecked, they mutate into tyrannies of goodness. The best thinkers, from Socrates to Hannah Arendt, warned that the greatest evils always wear the mask of necessity and virtue. The moment we say, we must do this for the right reason, without debate, we've already blinded ourselves. But the antidote isn't cynicism, it's awareness. The philosopher must become an architect of complexity, designing moral frameworks resilient to distortion. Every action becomes an experiment whose results must be observed, adjusted, and questioned. That's how we convert good intentions into wise intentions. Schopenhauer famously said, "Compassion is the basis of morality." But even compassion must be enlightened by intellect, or it morphs into sentimentality. Perhaps that's the central challenge of our time: how to remain kind without becoming naive, how to be moral without becoming moralistic, how to help without harming through ignorance. Next part title: The Paradox of Compassion, How Emotional Goodness Becomes a Tool of Control. Continue the paradox of compassion, how emotional goodness becomes a tool of control. There is no force more double-edged than compassion. When it's pure, grounded, humble, conscious, it becomes the seed of civilization. But when it's distorted by ego or fear, it becomes tyranny disguised as mercy. Schopenhauer called compassion the root of morality, yet he also warned that when pity loses discipline, it can enslave what it seeks to save. This is the essence of the second great Cobra Effect, when emotional goodness transforms from healing into control. It happens subtly, quietly. You start helping people not because you honor their agency, but because it helps you feel necessary. You moralize intervening, not to reduce suffering, but to avoid the discomfort of witnessing it. You dress up your anxiety as altruism. Think about modern society's obsession with safe spaces, trigger warnings, and laws crafted to protect feelings from friction. These ideas start from empathy but mutate into fragility factories. As soon as we protect people from every discomfort, we disarm their capacity for growth. Jung said the soul expands through suffering, through integration of shadow. But an overprotective culture denies that maturation process, producing generations that cannot endure contradiction. What if our compassion, by cushioning everything, is manufacturing fragility as an industry? This happens in relationships too. The person who always wants to shield their loved ones from pain slowly becomes their captor. Parents who can't tolerate their children's discomfort raise adults addicted to reassurance. Friends who fix every problem steal opportunities for resilience. Lovers who fear conflict suffocate intimacy with appeasement. Modern individuals call this love, but it's closer to imprisonment, a moralized variant of control. Nietzsche once wrote, "Beware of rescuers, they hang around forever." And he was right. Emotional saviors bind others in invisible contracts. Let me help you, but only as long as you remain weak enough to need me. The transaction looks tender, but it's ego wrapped in empathy. That's why real compassion requires distance, not absence of care, but absence of ownership. To love someone is not to remove their obstacles, but to respect their ability to face them. The same applies politically. Compassion that infantilizes citizens becomes authoritarianism in benevolent disguise. Look at how government initiatives born to aid the poor often end up creating systemic dependency. Each reward spawns another breeder of cobras. Every policy crafted to eliminate suffering multiplies its forms. Ask yourself, are we building solutions or dependence disguised as virtue? Philosophically, this paradox exposes our addiction to certainty. Good intentions give us a feeling of moral control in a chaotic universe. The Cobra Effect shatters that illusion by showing that even light, when unmanaged, casts destructive shadows. That realization terrifies most people. So to escape the uncertainty, we cling to moral extremes. The louder, the clearer, the simpler the solution, the safer we feel. Ban this, subsidize that, silence them, protect us. We legislate empathy the way we once legislated faith. But the crowd doesn't notice its regression into moral absolutism because it feels like kindness, not coercion. Hannah Arendt called this the banality of good, a collective hypnosis where ordinary people perpetuate harm through emotionally righteous obedience. And the wise, those who question the overreach of empathy, are dismissed as cold or cruel. Yet modern society exiles discomfort as cruelty because we mistake ease for care. The Cobra Effect infects our education, politics, and spiritual lives, tricking us into thinking simplification is salvation. Real morality demands courage to sit in uncertainty, to balance reason and emotion without surrendering to either. The wise don't chase moral purity, they chase alignment between intention and awareness. They know moral certainty is just an emotional anesthetic for existential anxiety. So the real question becomes, do we want to do good or do we want to feel good while calling it goodness? That question separates the thinker from the sentimentalist, the philosopher from the moralist. To act with enlightened compassion requires detachment, not apathy, but perspective. Detachment lets us serve humanity without trying to own it. The Buddha said, "Those who cling to the idea of helping others make themselves miserable, not because helping is wrong, but because attachment to outcome poisons intention." The Cobra Effect is simply the universe mocking our arrogance of control. It reminds us that morality is not about dominance of goodness, but dialogue between complexity and humility. Each time you plan to fix the world, pause and ask, are you solving or are you sedating? Are you empowering others or emotionally colonizing them? That pause, that contemplative hesitation, is the mark of maturity. The paradox of compassion dissolves only when we trade the intoxication of moral emotion for the discipline of quiet wisdom. True kindness, in the Schopenhauerian sense, is respectful of fate. It alleviates suffering where possible, but never presumes omnipotence. Perhaps that is where morality finally transcends sentiment, when love learns to relinquish control. There is a peculiar moment in every moral crusade when the helpers become tyrants. It doesn't begin with malice, it begins with conviction. Every revolution in history started as a moral awakening, a cry for justice, compassion, equality, salvation. But once that moral force becomes institutionalized, once virtue becomes organized into power, it undergoes mutation. Compassion becomes coercion, justice becomes revenge, idealism becomes ideology. The moral flame that once illuminated truth begins consuming reality itself. That's the final and most catastrophic Cobra Effect, when good intentions not only fail but metastasize into harm. Nietzsche warned that whoever fights monsters should see to it that he himself does not become a monster. This is not metaphorical, it's psychological. When we pursue good without understanding the shadows inside us, we externalize evil into others and feel justified in destroying them. That's how inquisitors burned heretics in the name of purity, how wars were waged to save souls, how utopias descended into prisons. The tragedy is that such violence feels righteous while it unfolds. Everyone believes they are saving the world. The question we must ask is terrifying in its simplicity. Can virtue exist without humility, or does it rot into tyranny the moment it feels certain? Philosophy shows us that every moral ideal carries within it a paradoxical opposite. Freedom breeds chaos if untempered by responsibility. Peace breeds stagnation if detached from strength. Equality destroys excellence when divorced from merit. Life itself is built upon tension. Every virtue needs its counterweight to stay alive. But the moral zealot, the unconscious do-gooder, cannot tolerate that tension. They crave simplicity, totality, purity. In their world, nuance is betrayal. They mistake moral discomfort for immorality itself. This is why moral absolutists are so dangerous. They erase nuance to preserve their own sense of innocence. Yet civilization depends on nuance, on dialogue between opposites. Schopenhauer observed that compassion, when pure requires detachment from ego. But when compassion fuses with ideology, it becomes possession. You stop wanting to reduce suffering, you want to win. You start weaponizing virtue to dominate discourse, to silence dissent, to maintain your purity illusion. And ironically, the wiser a society claims to be, the more its conscience tempts it toward this self-righteous overreach. We become so obsessed with being good collectively that we forget to be good individually, to examine motive in silence before broadcasting it to the crowd. Have you noticed how modern virtue signals louder the more hollow its soul becomes? Consider our information age, a living theater of the Cobra Effect. Every cause becomes a hashtag, every moral question an algorithmic battlefield. The intention was noble: democratize voices, empower awareness, connect humanity. But what emerged instead? Outrage economies, digital mobs, cancel movements. The architecture designed for dialogue turned into a factory of division. Technology amplified not our wisdom but our impulsiveness, the emotional circuitry that moralizes before it comprehends. And here we see Schopenhauer's warning echo again. Most people want morality only to the extent it doesn't threaten their vanity. The internet became a cathedral of that vanity. Every moral conversation now courts performance compassion, is timed in metrics of visibility. When good intentions meet attention addiction, the result is moral theater, where the louder you perform empathy, the less you practice it privately. The Cobra Effect operates invisibly here. Each post meant to inspire understanding deepens polarization. Each algorithmic reward reinforces outrage as virtue. We wanted community, yet we built conformity. We wanted truth, yet we optimized emotion. And then we wonder why every moral debate feels simultaneously righteous and cruel. To break this cycle, we must reimagine what virtue actually is. Virtue is not purity, it's balance. Aristotle defined it long ago as the golden mean between extremes. Courage lies between cowardice and recklessness, generosity between stinginess and waste. True virtue listens before acting, doubts before judging, and acts without self-advertisement. It coexists with imperfection rather than pretending to transcend it. A society that reclaims balance protects itself from the Cobra Effect because it treats morality as inquiry rather than confession. It allows for self-correction instead of moral dogma. But this demands a different kind of citizen, one who no longer mistakes feeling right for being right. A citizen humble enough to assume that their benevolence, if unchecked, might destroy what it hopes to protect. The Stoics understood this long before behavioral science existed. Good intentions require restraint, not expansion. You govern not by imposing your goodness but by regulating your ego's thirst for certainty. And maybe that's the hidden jewel at the core of all philosophy. The realization that the first thing you must discipline is. So what then is the enlightened path forward? Perhaps it's to expand beyond the naive illusion that morality and wisdom are synonymous. Morality gives direction, but wisdom gives depth. One tells you what to do, the other tells you how and when. The wise do not chase perfection, they refine proportion. They measure impact instead of indulging emotion. They see that to improve humanity, you must understand its chaos, not erase it. That's why all the enduring spiritual masters, from Buddha to Marcus Aurelius to Christ himself, warned against self-righteousness as the final temptation. Because righteousness, when it forgets reflection, births cruelty in sacred robes. So the next time your heart burns with the urge to fix, save, or reform, pause. Ask yourself, if this succeeds, what else does it change? If the answer frightens you, you've begun to think like a philosopher. The Cobra Effect is the universe's way of teaching humility to well-intentioned hearts. It reminds us that meaning and morality must dance, not compete, that good intentions without wisdom are maps drawn in fog. So, become a moral cartographer. Chart compassion, but mark its hazards clearly. Only then can we build systems that heal rather than haunt, help rather than harm. For in the end, morality without awareness is madness. The line between savior and destroyer is thinner than we want to admit, drawn only by self-reflection. The heroes who survive history's judgment are never those who burn brightest in virtue, but those who thought longest before they lit the fire. The Cobra Effect, at its core, is not a curse, it's a warning whispered through centuries. Be careful when you mean well, because the human soul, like the world it inhabits, is complex, recursive, and alive. To love it wisely is harder than to fix it rashly. So, let goodness slow down until it can see itself. Let intention bow to awareness before acting. That moment of hesitation between impulse and wisdom, that stillness, is civilization's only defense against its most ancient enemy, the seductive violence of virtue. If there is one silent truth we keep missing, it's that the world doesn't collapse because of evil. It collapses because of certainty. Evil at least reveals itself, certainty hides under halos. The Cobra Effect, in the deepest philosophical sense, isn't about policy errors or moral backfires. It's about our ancient discomfort with ambiguity. We want life to be an equation. Good intentions in, good outcomes out. But life doesn't bend to our moral arithmetic because reality isn't constructed for simplicity. It's designed for balance. Humility, not idealism, is what aligns us with that design. Every sage, from Lao Tzu to Kierkegaard to Simone Weil, understood that truth isn't a possession, it's a process. The moment you think you own it, you've lost it. And yet here we are, building social systems, moral crusades, and personal philosophies around the blind arrogance that having the right motive licenses us to stop thinking. We confuse emotional conviction for ethical accuracy, passion for comprehension, sincerity for competence. But sincerity doesn't save us from destruction. The most catastrophic decisions in human history were made by people certain they were benevolent. The only antidote, the only true armor against well-intentioned harm is humility. So ask yourself, can you act decisively while admitting you might be wrong? Can you pursue justice without assuming you already embody it? Humility is hard because it demands perpetual learning in a world addicted to self-righteousness. It confronts the ego's most sophisticated illusion that it can control consequence through clarity of heart. But humility whispers, you are not omniscient, the web of reality exceeds your moral vision. This isn't weakness, it's wisdom disguised as modesty. The Tao Te Ching calls it the virtue of the valley, the ability to receive rather than impose, to flow rather than force. It's the opposite of the Cobra Effect. Instead of reacting, we observe. Instead of fixing, we understand. Modern culture mocks this slowness. It idolizes immediacy, demanding that every crisis be met with swift certainty. But speed corrodes discernment. Every rushed solution multiplies the very crisis we seek to cure. We've grown so impatient with complexity that we rebrand recklessness as action and equate sensitivity with moral superiority. Real wisdom isn't loud, it's patient. It allows the dust of emotion to settle before making judgment. You can almost hear Marcus Aurelius reminding himself centuries ago, wait, observe. The truth will reveal itself in stillness. To practice humility today is, therefore, nothing less than rebellion, a quiet revolution against the tyranny of haste and the idolatry of correctness. Humility also humanizes morality. It acknowledges that knowledge evolves, that even goodness requires revision. Every moral stance, if frozen by pride, decays into dogma. Take any ideology that began with liberation, social, religious, political, and you'll find that once it grew sure of its moral monopoly, it betrayed its essence. The Cobra Effect takes root precisely at that inflection point, when a movement stops asking questions and starts issuing decrees. Humility resists that moment by keeping morality open-ended, dynamic, dialogical. It says, I might be incomplete, help me see. Imagine if global systems were designed with that spirit, economic models that adjust before collapse, educational systems that prioritize curiosity over indoctrination, leaders who admit mistakes instead of prosecuting dissent. The irony is that humility, often ridiculed as passive, is what keeps civilization interactive, adaptive, and alive. Pride stagnates, humility renews. Socrates called himself wise only because he knew he didn't know. Maybe today's world is desperate for that same innocence, a renaissance of not knowing, a humility so courageous it refuses both cynicism and arrogance. Do you realize how few people can change their mind without losing their identity? That's the truest measure of intellectual maturity. But humility must be practical, not poetic. It's not about meekness or self-deprecation, it's about proportion. It's remembering that every action casts unintended ripples, so you account for them in design. That's why thinkers like Nassim Taleb speak of antifragility, the idea that systems must anticipate disorder. In philosophical terms, humility is antifragility. It acknowledges uncertainty as fundamental and learns to grow from it. This extends to personal life too. Every relationship, every career, every belief system carries a Cobra Effect waiting for unconscious pride to trigger it. You seek control in love and destroy intimacy. You chase happiness furiously and make yourself miserable. The humble person steps back, letting things breathe. They understand that long-term stability arises not from tightening control, but from releasing expectation. The paradox is ancient. The more loosely you hold life, the less it breaks in your hands. Inwardly, humility frees you from the tyranny of perfection. Outwardly, it prevents you from projecting your fears as mandates for others. It transforms moral urgency into moral patience, the ability to let goodness mature slowly, like wine instead of sugar. And perhaps this is the ultimate lesson of the Cobra Effect, that wisdom is not about avoiding mistakes, but about recognizing their inevitability and designing compassion to contain their damage. It's not about the eradication of evil, it's about mastering our responses to our own imperfect goodness. The world doesn't need more saviors, it needs stewards, people who understand limits, consequences, and the delicate geometry of change. True progress is never shouted, it's shepherded. It begins when we trade the arrogance of reform for the art of alignment. That's what Schopenhauer meant when he said the wise man is not one who conquers life's chaos, but one who harmonizes with its rhythm. And in that harmony we discover the sacred paradox of existence. Only by surrendering our need to control truth can we live truly. The Cobra Effect will always lurk where unchecked virtue meets impatience, but humility, deep, philosophical humility, is the antidote that turns harm back into harmony. So the next time you see something broken, before you rush to fix it, pause. Observe the pattern. Ask the uncomfortable question. Let wisdom interrupt instinct. Because a little uncertainty today may prevent the next catastrophe of conviction tomorrow.